And her mentor is Professor Carol Epps. Emily?
Good afternoon, everyone. So my project is called Moving to Water, Illuminating the Common Ground Between Dance and Daily Water Use. So I'm sure many of you aren't sure what that means, but basically I've chosen to design a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Interdisciplinary Studies to use art forms such as dance and visual art and integrate them to look at how we use water and how we use our body in everyday life. So I'd like to introduce this project with a few questions for all of you. Think back to the last time you washed your hands today. Or this morning when you woke up and you washed your face or brushed your teeth. Does anybody know how much water you used in those actions? It's normal if you don't. I tried to figure this out by looking at statistics and facts, but first by looking at the actions that we're physically doing when we do these things every day. As an interdisciplinary studies major, I've learned that there are many ways of knowing something. And there are several ways to know our relationship to water. Phenomenologist and dancer Maxine Sheets Johnston said the quote, "Movement is in and of itself a form of knowledge." So I took this perspective and I went to a conference over the summer that focused on the connection between movement arts, and ecology, and how artists can approach scientific topics and ecology using artist methods. I kept the concept of movement as a way of knowing in mind as I went to this conference and then when I came home. And I looked at statistics about how much water Americans use every day. The average American today uses between 80 and 100 gallons of water per day. In addition, this map is a good example of America's water footprint compared to other countries. At the time this map was made, the average water footprint of the US was in the range of 2.1 to 2.5 million liters of water per capita in a year. So basically, America uses more water than any other country. So when you look at how much water we use, juxtaposed with how small our actions feel every day, it becomes clear that it's ironic how we go through these actions almost without realizing what we're doing. So to illuminate this information or bring it to the public and make it more clear, I decided to create a dance called Moving to Water. In this dance, there are several variations of movements that we do every day at home, at school, or at work when we come in contact with water. To make the piece, I chose 8 movements from everyday life, including washing your hands, washing your face, your hair, twisting knobs, pulling levers, and drinking, sweating, and a few other actions, but there were 8 key actions that I drew from. To compose the piece, I had 4 dancers, play with these movements, try them over different periods of time, change up their qualities spatially, and think about the quantities associated with these movements. How many times do we do them on average, and how many times can we put them into a dance piece? So these pictures are examples of our rehearsal process. This is in the studio here at UMBC. And these are movements that were in the piece that have to do with wiping sweat, wiping your mouth after you take a drink, which are very, very mundane movements that we do every day. But when people are doing them together, it creates a striking image. And I wanted to have them perform this simple image as a way to make us realize that even though these actions are so simple, they actually have a large impact when it relates to how much water we use and how much we need to consume. This picture is also an example of the exploration that the dancers did on their own. They actually came up with these movements and several other movements in the piece. Though they're very simple and everybody does these every day, I had them try doing them on their own time, linking different movements together, And these are images of moments that they actually put together themselves. So I tried to make this a very collaborative process because it's about what all of us do. Another element of the piece is actually trying to represent statistical data in movement. And I only did this in a few parts of the piece, but there are a few movements in the piece that do line up with data. One moment in the piece includes the dancers standing very still as if they're in a shower, something that everybody experiences, was savoring the warm water. And I looked up how much water we actually use in 30 seconds, in a minute, in 5 minutes, and I realized that most shower heads give off about 5 gallons of water per minute. A low flow shower head gives off about 2.5 gallons of water per minute. So if the dancers stand for 30 seconds, that can represent about 2.5 gallons of water used. So I tried to find ways to kind of represent this data just in simple movement performance. The other part of this project that's very important is a program that I designed to hand out to audience members at the performance. I used graphic design programs to design symbolic illustrations of the movements that we do every day, and the movements that I drew from to create the dance piece. There are 8 total that I drew from, and each page contains one symbol that represents an action such as washing, such as drinking, such as standing in the shower, to really emphasize how simple these actions are, but also connect them with data or numerical information that represents how much we actually use when we do them. So it's still very simple, just like the movement in the piece, but it's just to reinforce what these actions mean. And I actually have a few examples here today, so I'm going to hand these to you guys if you want to take a look really quick. So you can pass those around and take a look. If anybody wants to keep them, that's fine. I chose to print these programs on paper that I found in recycling bins in the Fine Art Building. And I did this because I wanted to re-emphasize this idea of conservation. Even though this isn't water and it's just made of paper, I wanted to see how, as a designer or an artist, I can conserve something while I'm making my art. And so I collected some paper that was only printed on one side, and I printed my information on the other side and put it together. So the paper is reused before it will then be recycled again. So this program represents what's going on in the movement in the piece, and I handed this out earlier today when the piece was performed. The piece was performed at 11:15, so if anybody got to see it, thank you very much for going to see it, and it went really well. I had the piece performed outside on the Commons Terrace area in order to bring performance out of the context of a dance studio or the Fine Arts Building and really just put it in a public space, and also to bring these mundane actions that we do every day into more public view to make us realize that they aren't quite so mundane. And in conclusion, I would like to share a quote with you guys that means a lot to me. It's by Albert Einstein, and it reads, "We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them." And as an artist and a performer, this quote means a lot to me. I heard it a lot when I was at a conference over the summer where I was studying dance and ecology and the connection between the two, because many of the people who taught workshops there or classes were performers themselves who were trying to find ways to connect their knowledge of movement with the knowledge of scientists to look at how we're really using resources in our world. And so I think as an artist, I really advocate for the integration of the art and sciences and trying to use your own methods from the disciplines that you're skilled in to represent information that's important to everybody. So also to conclude again, I'd like to thank the Office of Undergraduate Education, my advisors Carol Hess and Kelly Bell, and Carrie Sauter from Interdisciplinary Studies. And thank you all for being here.
Questions for Emily?
Did you do any research on the distribution of those 100 gallons per day in terms of how we actually use them? Because my assumption is that most of that goes into agriculture to produce corn that's fed to cattle that we then eat.
Right. Most of the, actually 1/5 of the water used in American is used within the household, so it's only 1/5. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not the largest proportion of all of the water used in America. But within that, most of the water that we use in the household goes to washing machines, washing clothes, taking showers, and actually flushing the toilet. And then everything else is distributed in similar but smaller proportions. And I chose to represent the actions that I did, also because they're interesting as performance, and they're what they're actions that require the most physicality from us, that can actually, that most physically connect us to the water versus just turning on a machine or something like that.
Well, I congratulate you for taking two very disparate topics and integrating them. I think that's a real step forward, and I'm very pleased about that. And I saw the performance this morning. I think it needs chapter 2 or scene 2, scene 3, or even before, to talk about scarcity and why. Because I'm not sure, whereas you have a fair amount of knowledge about water, and we seem to have a lot of it here in the United States. It's easy and not very expensive. But as you know, there are people who walk a mile a day to get water that may not even be potable. So I think there's opportunity to take this and do more with more grants, right? more URCAD money.
I agree, and I thought about that when I was doing this, especially reading about what was going on in Japan at the time. And I tried to actually incorporate something very subtle into the piece that related to scarcity or related to a lack of water. I know I can't show it to you right now, but at the end of the piece, there's a moment when all of the dancers line up in a single file line and walk in a weaving pattern until they finally get to a bucket that has water in it, and then they all take a drink. And it's just a very simple image that happens, but I got the idea from an image that I saw of a group of people in Japan that were at a shelter that were waiting, and it's an aerial view of how many people were in line and how they had to leave and wait for hours and hours to get water. And so I think that that's a really great idea to try and do something more with that idea.
At the beginning of the conference, we had a keynote speaker talking about the importance of research in the arts. So what do you see, I mean, what is the fruit that you're bearing, sort of bringing these two things together? Like what to you would be the best outcome for this piece?
Best outcome? I think ideally, I would like it to be a type of performance experience that people can come to and really feel kinesthetic empathy when they're watching these dancers. And maybe not even think of them so much as dancers or performers, but just as other people. And I'd like to find a way to make that process better and more clear to people and maybe more interactive, and basically find a way that we can connect kinesthetically to understand an important issue rather than just through other methods that we're already used to doing.
If there are no other questions for Emily, let's give her a hand.
3 years ago, most of the people have a great education.